In this episode, we discuss the Apalachee High School shooting in Georgia and whether stuff like this is really now just a fact of life. Consider why Russian propagandists seem to be so keen on secretly amplifying right-wing voices in American media, and react to the question on whether marijuana is too strong nowadays. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who may be mischievous, but many find him quite endearing. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, you ready to show the people what happens if they say your name 3 times?
I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Let's just have a show.
All right, well, I said
don't
it
ever,
once.
don't ever, don't, yeah, that's it. No more.
All right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, we ask that you subscribe, hit like on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. Now, we're recording this on September 10th, 2024. And last week, there was a school shooting in Apalachee High School in Winder, Georgia, which is an Atlanta suburb, that left 4 dead. Both the alleged shooter, the 14-year-old Colt Gray, and his father, Colin Gray, who gifted him the assault rifle allegedly used in the shooting, have been charged in connection with the shooting. Now, since the shooting happened, in addition to the kind of the mourning that the individuals and the people close to this situation, and also the nation as a whole has gone through, there's been renewed discussion on what we as a society can or should be doing about the mass shootings, the shootings in schools, and so forth. And as a part of this conversation, Senator J.D. Vance, who is also the Republican vice presidential candidate for the upcoming election, has asserted that school shootings are, quote, a fact of life. And he suggested that the problem is really more so that schools are soft targets, with the suggestion that the solution is tied into making the schools less soft targets, more higher end security, higher level security. So Tunde, just to start us off, what were your thoughts on the shooting generally, and also on Vance's comments, as far as that this is kind of just a fact of life now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the shooting's a tragedy. I don't think we need to go into that in more detail than it's already been. But, and then J.D. Vance's comments are also a tragedy because I think it shows, I would have, at another time in my life, said it shows a lack of leadership. But I think in a more mature version of myself, I can just say it just reflects a different ideology to mine. So I can respect it if people think that, the only way to do things is to shoot your way out of them, and that more violence will help solve violence and all that kind of stuff. And this whole tough guy attitude of, we just need to, make schools into military bases or something in order to defend kids. When, and just preparing for today, I was reminded about how historically we have had different leadership in this country that when things like this have happened, have used their power and their position to actually make changes so that the American people can have a different experience in kind of day-to-day life. And I'll give examples of that, but I mean, that's my initial thought, just to pass it back to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thought. The idea of fact of life, and that phrase, that kind of clip has caught a lot of people's attention. It's not factually at the core level incorrect in the sense that, yes, this is something that seems to happen periodically. And so therefore it is something that we have to continually deal with. It is a fact of our lives that this type of stuff, like nobody's sitting around saying that this isn't going to happen again based on the current trajectory. But yes, the idea that it happened, I think first you always, you take second and you there's a mourning, in terms of, and just a senseless violence. And it's like, you never want to see it, whether it's in schools, whether it's in neighborhoods, whether it's anywhere, And so, I think that part of the role of the government, though, is to try to create conditions where this won't happen. And so I think what it reflects is almost a surrender, like the idea of, what Vance's comments reflect is a surrender. The idea that we don't want to do anything about the availability of guns. Like he's essentially taking that off the table. And so you go to without saying it expressly. And then so you go to all our solution's going to be to put more guns in the schools and to have, like you said, turn it into military-based style security and so forth. And it's really a surrender. It's kind of like if you don't have a solution to a problem, yourself, then you start talking in these defeatist terms. And so I think that that's really what it is. It's kind of like I based on his view, and I don't even know if it's an ideological view. It's just like kind of like the way he thinks the world should work, in a sense of he doesn't want to, in any scenario, in any case, take away the ability of people to carry around guns as they want or buy as many guns as they want, any kind of guns that they want. Conceivably, conceivably there's limits to that, but the limit he wants to be, something that is beyond anything the government can do in the short term. So yeah, the surrender aspect to it, the throwing your hands up, hey, this is just what's going to be. So let's just work on security, and not even trying to come up with, hey, well, what have we done in the past to address this? Is there anything else that's going on in society that we can do to try to make this better? And so, yeah, the white flag is really just it's disappointing, I think, more than anything, from somebody in leadership. Because if you're going to wipe up the white flag, then you should get out of leadership. We need people in there that can see problems and say, hey, well, let's try to figure out solutions.
Well, that's why I realized that this is an ideological issue. I don't think I don't think he's lacking of leadership on this, and that he doesn't. I just think he doesn't believe that the way to approach this might be a way that you and I might, or that historically many, the United States has approached it in general.
But my point is that, okay, so let's do that. Let's say that that's true. There could be other ways still to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Like, again,
I agree.
It's not only take away all guns or have guns be unfettered. It's like that's a false choice to create from somebody who intellectually has surrendered on the issue.
No, I agree.
He doesn't want to think about it.
But that's why I think there's a bigger strategy at play with topics like this in general, which this show isn't about that, but it reminds me of things like abortion or something like that, where it's either this extreme all one way or the other way, and it's a certain way to create single issue voters. So this touches on something like the Second Amendment, which we know has been a sensitive kind of cultural issue in American history and political dialogue. So, but what I'm getting at, James, is think about it. I in researching today, that's what maybe really sobered me about this topic, because I learned that in 1934, we had something called the National Firearms Act because of the Tommy gun. If you remember things like the Valentine's Day Massacre in the 30s and the way that the mafia was beginning to, and people like John Dillinger and things like that, there were mass shootings.
They were outgunning the authorities, basically.
Yeah, and that's another good point. They were better armed than the police at the time. And so the Roosevelt administration said, okay, we're going to stop this here. And guess what? The United States didn't collapse after 1934, right? We survived the Depression. We beat everyone in World War II.
Government didn't show up and start taking everybody's guns out of their house.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's my point. So we have that history. Then more recently, and this is in you and I's lifetime, and I'm just going to cite what I found here because, again, I'm born in 1978. So in my lifetime, in 1989, there was a shooting at a school that killed a teacher, and 34 children were shot, 5 of them whom died. And it was with a Kalashnikov rifle. 1991, 23 people dead, 27 wounded. With another shooting, July 93 in California, 8 people killed, 6 wounded from a Tech 9 with Hellfire triggers. It reminded me of the conversations about bump stocks and things like that today. And what happened after that, we had a 1994 assault weapons ban that was presided over by former presidents Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan at a signing ceremony signed by Bill Clinton. And reading that, it reminded me, hold on, first of all, that was leadership. The country was having an issue with mass shootings. They decided to do something about it, and it was supported by former presidents of both parties. And it was me reading that from just 30 years ago was a huge contrast to now. Wow, what happened? And to the point we made was, for 10 years, we had an assault weapons ban in this country. And again, between 1994 and 2004, I think everything was generally okay in this country. Like you said, the government wasn't confiscating Americans' guns and all that. So clearly, we have done something about this in the past with different leadership. Now we have leadership that, like you said, is just saying, oh, well, put up the white flag. We just got to accept kids getting shot in school, so on and so forth.
Or let's start preemptively by just taking potential types of solutions off the table, and just immediately taking things off the table. And I think it's a good point that you raise as far as the bipartisan nature of previous previous efforts to do this, in the sense that showed kind of a solidarity. Hey, Americans first, party is not over country. And so you said something very specific that I think is in play here. And you talked about one issue voters, you mentioned, and creating one issue voters, and also the idea, the idea of politics. And so what we're seeing here is the perpetual fight for power overtake any objective when having that power to actually try to solve problems that are going on in the country. It's just about keeping and maintaining or trying to acquire more power. So the reason someone goes immediately to this idea of, hey, well, before we even have any substantive conversation about this, we got to take certain solutions off the table, is because it's trying to gain political advantage, and it's trying to, do something with, like dealing with or to not deal with the actual problem, but just to say, hey, can we either, put more people in saying, okay, well, look, the Democrats are going to take away all your guns. They're going to, despite, as you pointed out, the government has dealt with this before without showing up at people's doors and taking all their guns. Let's try to insinuate that, or say that this is what the Democrats want to do, and we're not going to do that and everything like that. So it's to make it a political issue, but it's not even politics in the sense of, okay, then I'll get in power. Once I have the power, I will use that to help people. It's just power for the purposes of acquiring power. Like, it's not like they want to do something after they get in power. So it's kind of like, it's this real view, cynical view of all of this is just a game for power. But then once you have the power, it's not supposed to be turned and then used to help. It's just supposed to be turned to acquire more power.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, just one of the things to add, because it's also, it's almost like I think some of these people in leadership, I mean, forget about voters, but just the leadership, they live in a fantasy world. Like their world is the movies, for example. So one of the remedies that J.D. Vance mentioned, this is a sad part, that these same remedies keep mentioned, and at some point the public will not stand for it, but a lot of people will get killed and hurt along the way, which is, again, arming teachers, having more security at the school. And I'm thinking, okay, so this has been going on long enough that we've already got those examples. Uvalde, remember, even the whole police force of the city showed up. And because there was a lack of who was in command on the ground at that time, they still all hung out there for 15 minutes while this guy was shooting kids in the classroom. You could hear it on the body cams. And then you got the one here with us in Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And again, I'm not here to make fun of that security guard, that off-duty cop or whatever, a retired cop who stayed outside while the guns were going. I'm just saying that the fact that you have police presence and all this on the schools, those guys are still human beings too. They may or may not act a certain way in the given moment. And also, like we discussed about what happened in the 1930s, a lot of these people who want to harm other people in our community are better armed than law enforcement a lot of times, especially the guy just showing up. Maybe if a guy just shows up and he's got a pistol and the perpetrator has, these assault weapons.
And so is the answer that we're going to put SWAT teams in school? Are we going to do an arms race with people?
But James, here's the thing. This is coming from the same crowd that criticizes anybody that says we want to give kids like free lunch at school. Oh, we don't have the budget. We don't have the budget. Now, seriously, because I came across an article about 14 states, GOP-led states this summer in 2024 that sent back Medicaid funds for free lunches in summer for the kids that live in those states. So again, this is ideological. Like, these is not about spending. It's not, because you're right. If someone were to come and say, let's hire a SWAT team for every single school in America, there's some people in this country that will say, yeah, let's do it, and not care about spending the money. So that gets me thinking into other things. Like, okay,
but if it's like, hey, let's give kids that are
let's give kids
have
lunch,
a difficult time
maybe,
at home. Let's give
maybe healthy lunch. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what about the money?
No, it's too. We don't have the budget for that. And so my point is, I start thinking, okay, because money usually drives decisions for people, right? So I think who's incentivized, and I think about things like the NRA, the gun lobby, and all that. And again, we're tap dancing, and our whole country's being driven in a direction.
Before you go down that road, though, let me move the conversation along.
Go ahead.
There is an aspect of a cultural kind of divide or a cultural disagreement but the question of who does that cultural divide serves is not really dealt with enough, and that's why I know where you're going. So I mean, like, let's drill down a little bit on that. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but why do you think enough Americans are willing to kind of live like this, and willing to allow this to be a fact of life, that a consensus on trying to solve it, again, trying to solve it, not even solving it, but just a consensus on even should we try to solve this is, something that we can't even come to, like, Is it purely the Second Amendment? Like as you're alluding, are there financial concerns that, or cultural, financial concerns that are preventing us, or that create these barriers for people even to agree, hey, maybe we should try to solve this, or is it cultural, or what do you see as the impediments, for us, for our society to have so many more people to have to die before a consensus can be reached on trying to solve this?
So I think it's a conflagration of things.
Most things.
And it's a long moving iceberg or aircraft carrier. So this isn't something that someone just snapped their fingers 2 years ago and all of a sudden everything changed. I think this is generations of effort, probably really 30 years, ever since the assault weapons ban, when some forces behind the scenes and, figured out that, hey, we better, just like with abortion, we better start doing things long-term outside of the scope of traditional electoral politics in order to have the results we want. And in that sense, I think the Supreme Court has been very instrumental. There's a case from 2022 called, the Bruen case, Bruen, which is allowed, for example, a case to just happen. I don't know if you heard about this, James. I was reading about this 2 weeks ago, early September. You now are allowed to have open carry on public transportation in Illinois, because the judge who overturned a previous court ruling that said you can't carry a gun on your hip in the subway in Chicago. Maybe that's not a good idea.
I think it's upholding a law that said that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is that they heavily cited that 2022 case from the Supreme Court. So it seems like, again, just like other things we've seen, that the Supreme Court has been very good at leaving some breadcrumbs for other judges around the country who want to knock down some of the laws. And that's my point. This is ideological, because I don't think it's a good idea to let people have open carry on a subway in a big city that already has issues with violence. That's just me, right? And I think that, again, people in the courts are very choosy because they're very constitutional and want to do everything by the book on some topics, but they're not on others. So something like the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech, we know that there's limitations of hate speech and you can't yell fire in a theater. And there's also things like burning the American flag as part of freedom of speech, even though we don't like that and it's uncomfortable. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, this court doesn't appear to want to rationalize not having a gun on the subway.
It's just that it's just where they choose to draw the line, because they're not arguing that you should be allowed to have a tank, or an RPG type of thing, they're not arguing for that, or
because no one's brought that up in front of the court. Let's bring that up. Let's see what they say.
And so, but to me, I think it's ideological, but I think the ideology more goes towards because again, I look at this and I'm not even looking at specific solutions. To me, it's the will to try to solve. That's where you get kind of the ingenuity to come up with solutions, because you can come up with solutions that don't offend the traditional interpretations of the Second Amendment. Now, that's to your point, where the court plays fast with these traditional interpretations as it sees fit, at the court as it currently stands. But I think the ideological problem is that the Republican Party at a certain point, before maybe 40 years ago, really went down this path of the government is the problem and not the source of any solutions to problems. And so once you go down a certain distance on that path, where the government, your ideology is based around the government's the problem, the government needs to get out of the way, yada, 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 for all of these things, then the type of people that you will send into government won't even have the mental kind of mindset. They won't have the mindset. They won't have the kind of the constructs in their mind on how to use government to solve problems, to address the issues facing society. Their mindset is about obstruction. Their mindset is about playing politics and gaining partisan advantage, because that's ideologically what the party's about. The party's not about saying, okay, well, here's a problem that we have. Here's our Constitution. How can we figure out a way within the context of the Constitution to address this problem? That is a kind of a thought process that I think the biggest problem is, from an ideological standpoint, that thought process has been removed from the Republican Party, because they don't look at as a government role as an idea of, hey, let's figure out how we can address problems that are solving the issues facing society. Having power is just a means of acquiring more power, and so, because they're really good at that. That part, they're really good. They're really good at using existing power.
Let me ask you a question,
to get more power. And so I think that. Oh, go ahead.
I got a question. So you're telling me that when they're ready to deal with guns, they'll storm the Capitol. That's how we'll know? Sorry, I just couldn't resist.
I just think that
you just said they wouldn't do it the traditional way.
It's clear that the energy and the kind of the mindset, the mental energy in the party, in the Republican Party right now is about how can we use power to gain more power. It's not about, and this is where you get to, oh yeah, we can put judges in, we can, do this with elections and all this other kind of stuff. We can, file lawsuits and all that.
We can have a president who's immune.
They have a lot of ingenuity when it comes to that stuff, but it's when it comes to saying, hey, we have some power. We're in the government. We're, government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let's use that to try to figure out within the constraints of the Constitution, how can we address some of the problems that are facing the nation? And that's that. Their mental, their ingenuity doesn't go to that at all. And what our two-party system fails when one party basically gives up on trying to make people's life, because one party can't be kind of the both sides of the debate. The reason we have it set up with having two sides of a debate is try to come to a better answer, to try to look at pros and cons and all that kind of stuff. And one side is just out on that.
Yeah, it's like having two spouses in a marriage and only one is taking the relationship serious, or two parents and only one is parenting.
Yeah, I think two parents is a good example.
Yeah. And so I'm laughing because I'm thinking, like, with the recent ruling that gives a president of the United States immunity, or I guess at least certain presidents maybe, I'm trying to think about the people in the court that supported that, sitting down for how can we make a president a king within the confines of the Constitution?
I mean,
somehow they manipulated that.
It's another example. I mean, it's another example of how can we use power to acquire more power versus how can we use power to try to help people and make people's lives better. And so I think that's ultimately the problem that we have. And you end up just saying, hey, these problems are a fact of life, when you no longer even think about, hey, how can I use my position, my authority within the constructs of the Constitution to make it better? Or make people's lives better. And obviously in our democratic system, unless and until the public holds people accountable for not having that thought process in their head anymore, we'll just keep going down that road. But I think we can wrap this topic from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us. We'll have 2 more topics here today, so check those out as well. And we'll talk to you then.